He thought it would be just another easy takedown. A homeless man, a public sidewalk, and a cop with something to prove. But what Officer Kane didn't know was that someone powerful was watching. And this time, the badge wouldn't protect him. The sun was beginning its descent over Sacramento, washing the streets in a golden glow as the city exhaled the final breaths of another weekday. Office buildings cast long shadows, and the gentle rustle of trees along the sidewalk danced with the hum of distant traffic. Amid it all, Eric Porter sat behind the wheel of his charcoal gray sedan, his tie loosened just enough to betray the long day behind him. The air conditioning purred softly as he adjusted the vents. The car's interior was a sanctuary, quiet, clean, organized. Much like Eric himself, the local radio station played a mellow jazz tune, faint in the background, adding to the sense of calm. As Eric approached the intersection of 24th and Franklin, the light turned yellow. A younger version of himself might have gunned it, but Eric eased his foot onto the brake, bringing the car to a smooth stop as the signal turned red. And then flashing lights. Red and blue strobes exploded in his rearview mirror, followed by the unmistakable shriek of a police siren. The suddenness of the sound cut through the calm, like glass shattering on marble. Eric blinked, eyes flicking to the mirror. The cruiser behind him was close. Too close. A reflexive knot formed in his stomach, something he'd felt too many times in too many cities. Despite everything he had accomplished, he knew that his appearance, a black man in his late 30s, sharply dressed, driving a nice car, was enough to provoke suspicion in the wrong minds. He inhaled deeply, glanced at his side mirror, and slowly pulled to the curb. No sudden movements. Everything calm, controlled. The police cruiser stopped behind him. Its engine rumbled low, like a threat that hadn't yet been spoken. Eric lowered his window, the cool air rushing out as warm street air drifted in. His fingers went to the steering wheel, both hands visible. No music now. No motion. A door creaked open. Out stepped Officer Bradley Larson. He looked like a man pulled from a recruitment poster. Clean buzz cut, square jaw, tall build. His uniform fit neatly, every buckle and strap in place, the badge on his chest catching the last rays of sunlight. He didn't approach the vehicle like a man asking questions. He walked like a man issuing judgments. His belt creaked as he adjusted it, one hand casually resting near his sidearm. "License and registration," he said without greeting. His voice was flat, but there was an edge to it, a quiet authority that demanded obedience. Eric nodded silently, already reaching toward the glove compartment. His movements were slow, deliberate. He knew how these situations could spiral. He handed over his driver's license, then unfolded the neatly kept registration. As Officer Larson took the documents, his eyes scanned Eric's face, not with curiosity, with evaluation, like he was trying to make a calculation and didn't like the math. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked, leaning slightly toward the open window. Eric's tone was measured and polite. "I'm not entirely sure, officer." Larson hesitated, then replied, "You didn't come to a full stop at the light." Eric raised an eyebrow, a slight frown crossing his face. "I slowed down well before the red, but if that's what you saw, I understand." Larson didn't reply. He just stood there for a moment, staring, not at the documents, but at Eric himself. A beat too long. Something had changed. This wasn't a routine stop anymore. Not in Larson's mind. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, his voice now tinged with suspicion. Eric glanced at the address printed clearly on his license. "I moved here recently. It's all updated on the ID." But the words fell into a vacuum. Larson wasn't listening. Not really. His eyes were darting between Eric's face, his hands, and the interior of the car. Eric could sense it, the quiet flicker of assumption turning into something else, something darker. He had seen it before in other cities, in other states, in different uniforms, but the same expression. The officer's posture had changed. He wasn't just investigating a traffic infraction. He was building a narrative, one that Eric didn't belong here, one where suspicion needed no cause, only a convenient subject. Larson leaned in a little closer. Where were you headed in such a hurry? Eric looked at him, deadpan. Just going home. Something in that answer, calm, unshaken, seemed to unnerve the officer. The silence stretched a little longer. The tension, too. Eric could feel it, coiled tight, humming in the air between them like a live wire. This was no longer about a stoplight. This was about control. And what Larson didn't yet know, what would change both their lives before the evening was done, was that he had just chosen the wrong man to make an example of. The sidewalk along Franklin Street seemed to hold its breath as Officer Larson stepped back from Eric's window, eyes narrowed, mind spinning. In the dying light, the chrome edge of Eric's sedan mirrored the officer's reflection, a stern silhouette against the early evening sky. To a bystander, it might still have looked like routine procedure, badge shining, pen poised. But inside that tight bubble of flashing lights and unspoken history, something volatile was building. Larson cleared his throat. Step out of the vehicle. The words were crisp, military. Yet underneath, Eric detected an almost eager tremor, as if the officer were itching to prove a point invisible to everyone else. Eric's fingers released the steering wheel one by one. He taught entire seminars on de-escalation, studied body language cues, taught recruits how to strip fear from a scene. Now he measured his own heartbeat, willed it steady, and opened the door. He rose to his full height, the tailored suit jacket catching the dusk breeze. Larson's gaze flicked across polished cufflinks, then lingered on Eric's face, searching for contrition or dread, something he could leverage. Finding only calm, he seemed unsettled. Hands where I can see them. Eric obliged, palms forward, posture relaxed. To an untrained eye, he looked compliant. In truth, every tilt of his shoulders projected silent authority, a reminder that respect was not a privilege to be granted but a right inherent to every citizen. Larson circled behind him, boots crunching over a patch of loose gravel. The officer spoke again, voice lower. Where were you headed in such a hurry? Home, Eric answered. No elaboration, no apology. Long day. Larson's tone was almost conversational, but his hand hovered near his belt as if politeness were a disguise he could drop at any moment. Productive, Eric replied, keeping his gaze forward. The sparse dialogue hung between them like threads of spider silk, gossamer, delicate, and capable of ensnaring the unwary. Larson stepped closer. Turn around. Place your hands on the hood. Eric pivoted slowly, palms landing on cool metal. The car's engine ticked as it cooled, each soft ping echoing the silent count in Eric's head. Note the distance, memorize the cadence, track every movement. The frisk began, abdomen, ribs, the line of each leg. Eric registered every unnecessary linger of the officer's hand, each press that ventured beyond protocol. It wasn't about a weapon. It was about establishing ownership of the moment. When the search yielded nothing, Larson muttered, "You're clean," as if disappointed not to find proof of his preconceptions. Eric straightened, adjusting his jacket. "Is there something in particular you expected to find, officer?" The question was terse, but not taunting, more a scalpel than a sword. Larson bristled. "I asked the questions here." He took a deliberate step into Eric's personal space. Their eyes locked, hazel meeting storm-cloud gray. Neither flinched. "You look awfully sure of yourself," Larson said. "Most people, they fidget, they stammer. You stand there like you've already won." "It isn't a contest," Eric replied. "It's an interaction that requires transparency." The word transparency struck a nerve. Larson's jaw flexed. He glanced at the license still in his hand. "Says here you only moved to Sacramento a few months ago. You sure settled him quick, didn't you?" His tone dripped with insinuation, as if success itself were suspicious. Eric kept silent. Silence, he'd learned, makes some men restless. They fill it with their own fears. Sure enough, the officer leaned closer. "You ever been in trouble with the law, Mr. Porter?" Eric gave a measured nod. "I've spoken with law enforcement many times. Professionally." Larson's brow knitted, reading between lines he couldn't yet parse. "Professionally? You a lawyer or something?" he asked, half mocking, half uneasy. "Or something," Eric echoed. letting the ambiguity hang like fog. The officer's nostrils flared. He didn't like puzzles he couldn't solve. A muscle twitched near his temple, the smallest tell that his confidence was cracking. He looked back at the cruiser, perhaps imagining what backup might think if called. Then he faced Eric again, voice dropping to a growl. "You think I pulled you over for no reason? You think you're invisible to the law because you're wearing a suit." Eric regarded him steadily. "I think the law should see everyone clearly, no matter what they're wearing." He paused, then added with a clinical calm that felt almost surgical, "And I think your interpretation of urgency has less to do with traffic safety and more to do with personal bias." Larson's pupils dilated. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might lash out. Verbal volley. Handcuffs, something. Instead, he drew a shaky breath, pulled back a fraction of an inch, and tried a new tactic. Intimidation by insinuation. "Careful with that tone," he said. "One wrong word and this becomes resisting." His hand hovered near the cuffs on his belt. Eric inclined his head. Resisting what exactly? A conversation. The question was razor-sharp, and in its reflection Larson saw his own power and balance laid bare. He tightened his lips, but said nothing. Around them, night seeped into the sky, indigo creeping over the remains of gold. Street lamps flickered on, witnessing the stalemate. Inside that circle of oscillating light, two men stood facing more than each other. They confronted history, expectation, prejudice, and the possibility of change. And though only one of them knew it yet, the next few minutes would redefine careers, reputations, and perhaps an entire department's future. Silence spread across the roadway like water poured onto parchment, filling every crack and space. Officer Larson found himself confronting a conundrum he'd rarely faced. A motorist who would not bend, would not brake, and, most confounding of all, seemed to know exactly how far the officer could legally push. The facade of routine had shattered, replaced by a raw, disquieting mirror held up to Larson's own motivations. He didn't like the reflection. He cleared his throat, forcing sound into a gap that felt suddenly cavernous. "You seem pretty confident," he said, voice lower but roughened by nerves. "Like you think you know exactly what happens next." He tried to infuse the statement with menace, but wavered midway, as though blown off course by an unexpected gust. Eric crossed his arms, every motion deliberate, controlled. "Confidence isn't the issue here, officer. Respect is." The streetlight above them buzzed faintly, casting a halo around Eric that seemed to intensify the statement. Respect. The word hit Larson like a thrown gauntlet. The officer's expression pinched. He stepped forward, closing the gap so fast the air between them seemed to compress. "Watch your mouth," he said, though even he must have sensed the thinness of the threat. Eric neither retreated nor raised his voice. "Am I being detained, Officer Larson?" The formal phrasing landed with surgical precision, language drilled into him during countless trainings he himself had overseen. Larson opened his mouth, but no answer came. The correct reply, either yes, with a clear legal basis, or no, might have saved him. Instead he sputtered, "I'm conducting an investigation." Vague, unsatisfying, a phrase officers sometimes used to buy time. But here, time was a commodity Larson no longer controlled. Eric tilted his head, as though studying a specimen under glass. Investigation of what? My speed? My compliance? Or something less tangible? The last phrase was gentle, but it pried at hidden motives with relentless subtlety. Larson felt heat climb his neck. A street over, a siren wailed in the distance. Another patrol car headed somewhere else, lights flashing blue against the dark. For a moment, Larson considered calling for backup, but dismissed it. He couldn't frame the situation without admitting he'd lost command of it. "You think you're smarter than me," he muttered. Eric didn't flinch. "I don't think about you at all, officer. I think about fairness, and the absence of it." Something flashed behind Larson's eyes. Anger, shame, perhaps fear. He drew a breath and let it out slowly through his nose, an animal measuring fight or flight. "People like you always." The words leaped out before his better judgment could cage them. He cut himself off, shaken by his own candor. But damage, once loosed, rarely returns willingly to its box. Eric's brows lifted almost imperceptibly. People like me, he repeated. No question mark, just a scalpel of echo, so that the phrase stood alone, exposed, forced into the light. Larson swallowed. The last rays of sunlight vanished, and in their place, darkness sharpened edges. The officer took a half-step back, seeking cover inside procedure. I think you should provide some identification besides this license, he said, voice clipped but shaky. Something to prove you are who you say. Eric regarded him steadily. You already have my license. It's state-issued ID. But if you need more... He reached toward his inside jacket pocket with exaggerated slowness. I'm reaching for my badge, he announced, voice calm yet ironclad. Larson's hand shot to the butt of his service weapon, reflex at war with reason. Eric froze mid-motion, then continued, inch by deliberate inch, until a black leather wallet emerged. Larson stared, confusion battling caution. The wallet unfolded with a soft click. Inside, under the weak glow of the street lamp, a gold shield gleamed. Eric angled it so the officer could read every engraved letter. Sacramento Police Department, Internal Affairs Division, Special Agent in Charge. The night breathed in. Larson's shoulders sagged as if all the air siphoned from his lungs. The badge was genuine, its authority undeniable. And with that small reveal, the center of gravity in the encounter shifted. Power drained from the uniformed officer, like sand through a cracked hourglass, collecting at Eric's feet. Eric held the badge a moment longer, letting the reality crystallize. Then he snapped the wallet shut. Shall we reset this interaction? He asked softly. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation, though Larson sensed refusing might be worse. He opened his mouth, but words clung to the roof of his mouth like wet ash. Finally hoarse. Sir, But apology felt cheap, and excuses rang hollow. He managed only. I didn't realize. Eric slipped the wallet back into his jacket. That, he said, tone steady as bedrock, is precisely the problem. The silence that followed was not empty but pregnant, with implications for careers, for lawsuits, for the fragile trust between public and police. And Officer Larson understood now that every step he'd taken tonight had led him, inexorably, to this precipice, a place where consequences waited like watchers in the dark. Time seemed to fracture into shards the moment Eric's credentials clicked shut. Larson stood immobilized, a statue in faded blue illuminated by cruiser strobes. His breath came shallow, as though a weight pressed on his chest, part fear, part dawning comprehension of how thoroughly he'd misread the stage. Eric spoke first, voice holding that impossible blend of calm and intensity. Officer Larson, I asked earlier if I was being detained. You never answered. Legally you must. The formality of the request provided Larson one last off-ramp, a chance to salvage something resembling procedure. He mustered. No, sir. You are free to leave. Eric nodded, accepting the statement not as a courtesy, but as entitlement. Yet he did not move toward his car. Instead, he took a measured step closer, meeting Larson's eyes with a gaze that felt both clinical and human. Before I go, he said, I'd like you to understand why this matters. Larson stiffened. Sir, listen, Eric interrupted, voice conclusive. I'm not here to lecture you on policy. I'm here to ensure accountability, yours and mine. He paused, letting the phrasing sink in. Accountability, a tidal word that can raise entire careers when it crests. Eric's tone softened, though the steel remained. Do you know what troubled me most during this stop? It wasn't your suspicion or the search, though both were unnecessary. It was the moment you decided I didn't deserve transparency. That moment tells a story that extends far beyond tonight. Larson's mouth twitched as if to protest, but memory ambushed him. The mocking tone, the phrase people like you. He looked away, throat tight. Eric pressed on softly, as an educator might. Bias thrives in the space between assumption and power. You closed that space the moment you chose dominance over dialogue. For every me, he gestured to himself. There are countless others who lack a badge, who cannot flip the script with credentials. They go home shaken. Some don't go home at all. The words struck with quiet ferocity. Larson felt sweat bead at the nape of his neck, despite the evening chill. He'd heard similar rhetoric in training seminars, but the classroom never felt this intimate, this indicting. Under the rotating glow of his own cruiser, he was no longer instructor, but the cautionary tale. Eric gestured toward the license, still in Larson's grip. "May I have my documents?" The officer's fingers trembled as he extended them. Eric slipped them into his wallet. "Thank you." A fresh gust of wind rattled the branches overhead. In the rustle, Larson heard what sounded like whispers. Every academy lecture on civil rights. Each departmental memo about community trust. All the words he'd dutifully signed after reading. Words he'd just betrayed. Eric stepped back, but before turning, he delivered the final verdict. "You'll hear from me again, not as a motorist, but as internal affairs. I expect full cooperation." No anger, only promise. The power reversal was complete. Larson, arm once poised above holster, now dropped to his side, fingers curling inward like wilted leaves. Eric opened his car door, then paused, looking over his shoulder. "Remember, officer, the badge doesn't elevate you above the public. It binds you to them." He slid into the driver's seat, engine humming to life. Taillights flared red, then faded as the sedan rolled into the night, leaving Larson in the fading strobe of his own authority. Minutes ticked by before Larson re-entered his cruiser. Inside, the radio crackled with mundane calls, noise from a reality that suddenly felt distant. He shut it off. In the hush, he replayed the confrontation second by second, each choice now weighted with potential disciplinary action. A knot tightened in his gut when he pictured the next morning. The summons, the hearing, the internal affairs review with Eric Porter across the table. Back in his apartment later, uniform draped over a chair, Larson stared at the ceiling, jaw clenched. His phone buzzed with a message from his partner. "Everything okay at that traffic stop?" He typed, deleted, typed again, then tossed the phone aside. Sleep refused him. Shadows on the wall formed the shape of flashing lights until dawn. Elsewhere in the city, lights burned in another apartment, Eric's. Though calm during the encounter, adrenaline lingered, keeping him awake at his desk. He reviewed online databases, pulling Larson's personnel file, marking incidents once dismissed as unsubstantiated. Patterns emerged like footprints in dust. Eric drafted notes for an immediate preliminary inquiry. By sunrise, a dossier 3 inches thick sat on his kitchen table, ready for the chief. As the city stirred to life, 2 men prepared for a reckoning, one to answer, the other to question. Between them lay a thin blue line stretched taut, ready to snap, or be rewoven under new rules. Morning light filtered through the blinds of the Internal Affairs office, striping Eric Porter's desk with pale gold. Beside a steaming mug of coffee sat the Larson dossier, now tabbed with color-coded notes. Eric's suit jacket hung on the back of his chair. He preferred rolled-sleeve pragmatism for the work ahead. On the wall, a framed quote from Martin Luther King Jr. read, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Today, those words felt carved into the very air. A knock sounded. Linda, efficient as ever, stepped in. "Good morning, Mr. Porter. Chief Daniels can meet at 2 p.m. I've also pulled last year's use of force reports." She placed a manila folder beside the dossier. Eric offered a grateful nod. "Thank you, Linda. And please clear my afternoon. We may be here a while." She left, closing the door softly behind her. Eric opened the new file. Charts, timelines, complaint forms. Each sheet a story, some resolved, others languishing in bureaucratic limbo. Patterns crystallized, minor infractions snowballing into bigger ones when early warnings were ignored. Larson was not alone. He was a thread in a frayed fabric. At 2 p.m., the conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and institutional coffee. Chief Daniels sat at the head of the table, silver hair clipped short, uniform adorned with commendations. His expression was wary, an equal parts defensive veteran and open-minded leader. Eric slid the thick dossier forward. It started with a traffic stop. He began, voice steady. It cannot end there. Daniels leafed through the pages, brow furrowing. You filed an official complaint. I did, Eric confirmed. But this isn't solely about discipline. It's about culture. These pages reveal a pattern of bias-based stops, unnecessary escalations, and lack of follow-through. He tapped the stack. Larson's case is symptomatic. We need systemic treatment. The chief leaned back, hand steepled. An internal audit of the entire department? You understand what that means: political backlash, union resistance, possible lawsuits. Eric met his gaze. And imagine the cost of not acting. Eroded community trust, increased civilian complaints, officer safety compromised by resentment. Reform isn't a threat. It's an investment. Silence reigned. A wall clock ticked. Finally, Daniels sighed. Draw up the framework. We'll present to the city council. Agreement, but with a caveat. Eric accepted the burden gladly. I'll need full access to training curriculums, body cam archives, and complaint reviews. Daniels nodded once. Battle lines, no, reform lines, were drawn. Over the next 6 weeks, corridors buzzed with new purpose. A cross-divisional task force assembled. Patrol officers, detectives, community liaisons, civilian analysts. They pored over gigabytes of footage, rewrote scenario-based training, built a transparent public portal for misconduct complaints. Eric hosted evening forums in community centers where residents, some skeptical, some furious, vented grievances and offered solutions. He listened, notebook in hand, recording every story, every plea for fairness. Larson's hearing arrived midway through the overhaul. The room felt part courtroom, part crucible. Eric attended not as adversary but as guardian of process, ensuring fairness extended even to those who'd failed to extend it. Larson, uniform pressed, sat stiffly. The board reviewed footage, witness statements, and past complaints. The verdict: a 6-month suspension with mandatory retraining and psychological evaluation. Some called it lenient. Others saw the mercy in a system often devoid of it. Eric saw a man handed a final chance, and a message sent to every badge in the department. Media coverage grew. Headlines shifted from cops suspended after IA sting to department launches, sweeping reform led by insider. Talk radio pundits debated outcomes. Community leaders cautiously praised transparency. When skeptics accused the initiative of being cosmetic, Eric released quarterly progress reports, raw data laid bare. Numbers didn't sway all hearts, but they proved momentum. 3 months later, City Hall hosted a public forum. Rows of folding chairs filled with officers in uniform, residents, activists, journalists. Eric approached the podium. A hush fell. Cameras clicked. He began, voice firm yet hopeful. Justice isn't the absence of wrongdoing. It's the presence of accountability. Tonight we stand together, not to vilify, not to shield, but to build. He outlined new policy. Mandatory de-escalation refreshers, an early warning system for misconduct patterns, community ride-along programs to humanize both sides of the badge. Mid-speech, he noticed Larson at the back of the hall, civilian clothes, eyes fixed on the floor. Eric didn't call him out. Reform was bigger than any single origin story. When he finished, applause rose, not unanimous, but strong enough to vibrate the walls. Eric stepped away, shoulders heavy yet buoyed by purpose. Outside, night had fallen again, but it felt different, charged not with dread, but with possibility. As he walked toward his car, a teenage girl approached, hesitant. "Mr. Porter," she asked. "My brother got pulled over last year. It didn't go well. Thank you for doing this." Her voice quivered with something between gratitude and relief. Eric smiled gently. "Hold us to it," he told her. "Keep speaking up." She nodded, and in that small exchange, Eric felt the sweep of months, no years, of work align into a singular point of clarity. Change, he realized, begins with one cracked facade, one hard conversation, one badge held to the light. And once begun, it spreads, slow, relentless, unstoppable as dawn itself. Officer Larson learned that day that the badge doesn't protect you from accountability. It demands it. If this story opened your eyes, share it. Start the conversations that lead to real change. And subscribe to this channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and demand better from all of us.